See you later.
Okay. Thank you, Alejandro. Well, I guess that for the benefit of the audience that is not yet here, I will, although I get into the middle of Eva's presentation of probably her own work and work in Serpentine Gallery. So I don't know, right? But basically, just to sum up, we have. I'm super excited to share with all of you this panel. We have here Eva Jaeger from Serpentine Gallery. Among many other things, she's working as a researcher at the Creative AI Lab, if I am right, and you can just elaborate on that later. We have also Refik Anadol, who I'm super willing to see your work tomorrow here in Barcelona. I will try I will try to drop a couple of very boring academic meetings I have. So I hope this is being recorded. So I will have some kind of reprimand for that. But and who is a very well-known artist, new media artist, and working with with artificial intelligence at large, so to speak. And we have also Francisco Bernardo, who is a new media artist. He's working currently at the University of Sussex as a postdoctoral researcher, and he's into music mostly, I would say. And so, well, there has been a lot of things going on today here. I don't know if you have been able to attend to all the things that were going on. I wasn't. I could just be at some of them. But basically, we are here to, in a way, to discuss about the present challenges of this relationship between AI and, let's say, I would say, creative world building at large in the broadest sense, right? So world building in the sense of creating an experience that engages audiences or other people into getting into a new state of mind, a new atmosphere, a new world, right? So people here in this panel has done this from very different venues and different aspects. So in doing so, there are several things that we could just talk about. So I'm not trying to impose any kind of a discussion. So let's let the conversation flow. So basically, for some things, like for example, one of the things that have appeared also in one of the workshops, for example, or in my practice, and probably yours too, is this kind of distance between the practice of the artists, the creative people who is working worlds, what they want to do, and what the actual methods were initially developed for, right? So there's a big distance between the methods of artificial intelligence and machine learning in particular, and some practices. Let's say more traditional ways of doing things. Huh? So people have an interest to do that, and they kind of find a barrier there. This is a barrier of the technology itself, language, concepts, etc. Well, we also spotted other barriers, like, for example, the types of places where this can happen, right? So, for example, here we have people that either are part of an institution that is devoted to art, like Eva, right? Or other people that have their own laboratory, connected or in a certain degree with also university institution, or people that definitely are within the university institution fully, right? And so, of course, that gives different settings, different access to different types of resources, etc. But there is a lot of practitioners out there, people that are interested, that let's say don't have this kind of umbrella or don't even know where to go, right? So, and that probably poses another difficulties, another kind of barrier, which is not technological or language or concept or practice, but let's say of support. So to start with, this is more or less in general the map. And from there, I would like, in a way, you try to spot if these are the challenges or there are other challenges out there, and how we could, in a way, tackle them and really confront them or evolve from there. That's it. So basically, it's open to you, right? I'm in the very comfortable position, just listening to your wisdom, right? Okay, so if anyone wants to start with any of these barriers or with any of these challenges, please go ahead, and we move on from there.
Okay, so maybe I can.
I can volunteer to step
Okay.
forward and be summarily executed. Well, I guess one of the most obvious barriers, it's the technical barrier, the knowledge barrier that artists face, right? So there's a lot of hype, there's a lot of available technologies, there's a sea of algorithms, there's data, whatever that means. There's data sets that are agglomerations of data. And these are like some of what people hear to be like the basic components of, engaging with AI, or if you want, with the most trendy variant, which is machine learning now. So there's a jungle, there's a complexity, there's a very complex environment that someone who wants to infuse their art with any kind of artificial intelligence technique needs to know how to navigate and to dive in throughout the different depths to achieve their artistic purposes or goals. And that in itself, it's a quite difficult challenge because we hear a lot about expertise. We hear a lot about the value of expertise decreasing in these latest times. We hear a lot about the balance or the trade-off between going deep and going broad, and that's a specific difficulty that people face in this challenge because with so much to tackle, can you actually arrive at you know any sufficient knowledge to achieve anything whatsoever? Like, can you really master one technique? And if you really take time to master that technique, will you actually produce something novel that will be recognized as an artistic innovation in your field? So there are plenty of problems to tackle. So I think I just started. We can start from here. We can start from more problems, I guess.
Oh,
So
okay. There is a point that I really just found also. That was in the last part of your intervention. You said it's about recognizing this as art, right? Or recognizing something as valid. I
sure.
think, yes, I think that, okay, that has been the case also with previous, let's say, interaction with technology historically, even if you start with the famous AT&T technology on art sessions of 1967, right? So there always has been this putting this relationship into question. I don't know. I mean, I don't know if it was the same thing when someone just come up with let's say, an easel and try to paint with a brush, and that was something like kind of anathema when you were just painting with your finger. I don't know. I mean, but there is something. It seems that there is something especially complicated in this recognition when this kind of technology is there. What your what's? I mean, Refik is saying yes, yes. So if
So
you want to share,
I think
yes,
it was a great point to just jump in because I'm currently working also for the Bell Labs archives for AT&T actually at
yes,
the moment
yes.
for Dallas, Texas, their headquarters. And
Mm,
it's so interesting that as Francisco said, and also with Eva, we were discussing that. I mean, first of all, for me as a media artist, it was almost like 10 years ago when I met Peter Weibel. And
mm,
he was one of my mentor at my first MFA studies at Istanbul. And I mean, while respectfully, I was very, very lucky that I was installing 300 media artworks myself as a
mm,
student because my scholarship requires to work. And to work, my task was install 300 media artworks and babysit them for 6 months in a museum. So that's
mm,
how I learned what is media art. But what was really interesting is, so Istanbul in Turkey, media art is not very well received at all 10 years ago. And when you put interactive artwork or a robot or some drawing engine or interactive pieces in front of a culture that have no idea, that beautiful communication between machine and a human was just remarkable. It's like a fantastic cultural setting that like it's like a research. Like you put an artwork, a robot drawing a portrait of a human, and that human has never like even see a robot in their life. I mean, isn't it the most beautiful moment of life that you witness something core and honest and direct and sharp? I mean, no offense, but yes, art is in the galleries and museums for sure. You open a door, behind it, there's art, yes, for centuries. I mean, most likely it's the most boring idea for a century, right? I mean, couple of centuries later, humans are putting art behind the walls under this shelter called architecture where they see and experience. I mean, this is a great narrative, but most likely after post-digital life where there is no anymore physicality of life, maybe these ideas will be so ancient, right? Like when they look at our archaeological studies, they will find these machines, what they mean. I mean, the same idea, right? So how can we be sure that the data become a pigment? How can we sure machine such as an intelligent being suddenly becomes an artifact, right? When we look at Michelangelo or Da Vinci or whatever, who is just invented many techniques, yes, they are pigmented physical reality. But when you collaborate with a machine, an algorithm, a system, I mean, what is it? Like, can we touch it? Can we remember it? If a machine just unplugged from the power, will we remember it? Or having a memory of a human will accept as like a form of art? I think these are incredible discussions that I think we need, right? But for me, what was really challenging is also, I'm very interested in space and architecture specifically. And I believe that architecture is just beyond concrete, glass, and steel, which is a very boring idea too, right? So the gravity and all the skins. So, but machine learning algorithms or latent space is an incredible concept that doesn't have this biased world. I mean, it's 10 to 24 dimension, and you cannot draw a planar section. Architecture is scrambling because nobody can draw this space and explain it. Nobody can make so far a building from latent space and so on. I mean, I love these corners that in science and technology, when art, they all come together. I think the big challenge of world making is literally limitation of life, the physical reality of our life. So then we have now metaverse, NFT speculations. I mean, people are like struggling in AR, VR, and XR. I mean, it's incredible chaos, to be honest. It's just beautiful. We apply like philosophy, we apply like all these mathematics and so on. But at the end, we are on a journey of understanding these things. I think it's incredible. And AI is one of, I think, our most funny, but also very genius tool that like this, I don't know how you feel it, but sometimes you are in the mercy of a machine. If you work with AI, right, you mostly don't know what it will learn unless you have a really specific certain task. And
You're
the
right.
beautiful unknown is just so fun. And also serendipity is there.
Mm-hmm.
So I think they're all great problems of world making with machine learning algorithms and data and so on.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so that there was this idea of just the unexpected, right? So it's this kind of tool that has some level of autonomy. I mean, it's not completely fully autonomous, but quite. And sometimes when Francisco was talking about the expectations, I find that most of my students, not in computer science, but let's say in other areas like in the School of Design, some of in the School of Art, they come to artificial intelligence with incredibly high expectations. I mean, they are waiting to find something almost hyper conscious, so to speak. There, right? It will take a lot of decisions on its own, which we know perfectly well that this is not the case. But you were pointing to the fact that working with it just creates something else, even for you, right? This is something that's very interesting. So in a way, but what we I think we find from the part of the computer science, and maybe not so much from the part of art, design, and other creative endeavors, is that we are not, let's say, at least on our part, working with this love for the unexpected, so to speak, right? So, and yeah, so I think that it's interesting to see how these two worlds clash and who really is into this kind of attitude, right? So I don't know, Eva, for example, you've been working with people that are in the creative AI lab. Probably you have found a lot of clash.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think to Refik's point, it's incredibly important to find people who are willing to admit those mistakes and that serendipity, because so much of the kind of things that are driving AI research are shrouded in a lot of media strategy of, a simple solution or sort of applications that would fit a business case, but aren't necessarily best suited to that technology and so on. So there's a lot of other sort of like political layers at play, which is why I'm really drawn to the artists who are working with machine learning specifically, but AI in general, because they're very open to those turns that are happening during the exploration. I wrote one note to Francisco's point about like whether we should go deep or go broad. This seems like a big question of our time. And it's something that we are thinking about a lot in the R&D platform at Serpentine. We write these sort of strategic briefings for 21st century cultural institutions. And I think our feeling is that there needs to be a lot more institutional specificity. So rather than considering the art world and the art general audience as a sort of like one conglomerate, that if we really want to use creative R&D in some sort of deep and embedded way, that we also have to reach sort of very specific audiences and build communities around them and have institutions that have specific kind of mandates and not act as if one institution can really like have an eye on everything. Yeah. And keep up with everything, because and then basically the thing is to argue for a lot more interoperability and to argue for a lot more collaboration so that as a whole, the cultural sector can have that knowledge where there's like individual nodes instead of sort of everyone trying to be a generalist. But in terms of our research at Serpentine and at the Creative AI Lab, I guess there's sort of two things that I can point to that I think will address some of the things that the three of you have brought up, all really important questions that we're deeply invested in. I think in terms of like the technical barrier and this feeling of a vast difference between the creative practitioner and the technical practitioner, this is a sort of binary that really needs to get broken, and we need to understand that there's a kind of what we are calling like art adjacent fields where a lot of experimentation is happening and there's new kinds of artistic practitioners emerging. And so, maybe we have to admit to ourselves that the experimentation that the cultural sector or cultural institutions would like to claim is actually happening outside of the art world. And we need to go to those places essentially. Maybe that's like a radical thing for me to say coming from Serpentine. But I think the biggest thing that we feel and what we were trying, the sort of space we were trying to serve in the Creative AI Lab is the fact that there's a lacking in infrastructure for artists who graduate from traditional arts education to develop practices when they're working with machine learning. There's just such a huge learning curve if you don't have a background in programming or creative computation. And this like sort of creates a domino effect and leads to a lot of things happening when artists then work with the AI, like including employing like total black box apps or like a fear of sort of inserting themselves in more cutting edge technologies and research and digging them up and really getting to the meat of it. Yeah. And this learning curve that the artists are experiencing, also our institutions are experiencing. They don't have necessarily, they're not built for that purpose of having sort of internal capabilities or expertise to produce, but also to interpret shows that are primarily about those technologies. And they end up using kind of vague or inconsistent language to describe the kind of phenomena or systems of a certain technology. And those technologies are absolutely essential to our everyday lives, and they arguably are going to have massive implications for the future. And so as a public institution whose mandate is, to consider ourselves and culture in the future, we need to be very precise with our language and very careful with the metaphors that we create so that we don't keep falling back on this sort of metaphor of like automation and the creative versus the machine and things like that. So we're trying to kind of complicate that space. And then the second thing that we sort of see really clearly is that we're at the very early stage of understanding the aesthetics of AI and understanding how making using AI systems, for instance, having an art practice that uses machine learning can affect our culture. And so our current theoretical framing around art making is that the real like conceptual work and cultural work happens in the back end or backstage environments of art making. So that's in the data collection, in the data analysis or labeling, in the selection of, you know, which scripts to run, whether you're making them yourself or making them collaboratively, etc. So yeah, that allows us to sidestep the sort of metaphor of automation. And we also argue that that's where the encoding of meaning is happening by our AI systems. And that's sort of a paradigm shift, that we are we are automating the encoding of meaning. And that's something that culture used to do, or has up until now sort of been the primary driver of meaning making. And if this is automated, you know, that's going to change things. And so what we're saying is, and we're sort of working on this right now, so I'm really open to any comments on it, is that we need to pay attention to the way that artists are encoding meaning in those back-end environments, and what it means to work with systems that are, what it means to collaborate with systems that are calculating meaning. Sorry, I think I've been talking for too long, so yeah.
This has been super interesting. I really like
it. It was a great intervention, really. And it was really good to start from the political side, I thought, because in the end, that's what rules our overall reality, right? And being embedded in a capitalist or a neoliberalist system with a lot of profits that are leading many of the objectives or the societal objectives, both in the state and the government, trying to make countries more competitive, or more obviously in the corporation, at the corporation level, where you can see that the transformation is happening in terms of culture, and they're shifting from, you know, software companies to AI first companies. And you see that there are like many strategies that they use to enforce that, just like, you know, coming up with specific educational strategies for their employees, like Google did, or establishing partnerships with artists, well-known artists, and becoming funders or patrons of art. And so that's one thing, and also political strategies for increasing the level of education, or focusing the education in terms of AI focused courses. So we see that there's a big push, there's a strong ideology, and you see that there's also the, you know, the competitive factor of you know, US versus China, and how these two economies are trying to take the lead on AI. So politically, we're under pressure to learn, to throw ourselves into learning all these technologies. And as artists, we face the pressure of using these technologies for art making, even if that doesn't really make sense. I mean, there are many cases in which we wouldn't have to use AI to make art, but still, because of all this pressure, because of all this hype, everyone is feeling, you know, that they need to understand what's a convolutional neural network to train with a huge data set of images that they were not the collectors, you know. So I think that's a really strong point of discussion, especially in terms of how it influences this idea of activism. Like it's almost like the fire starter of activism, but in a twisted way, because we see all this pressure mounting up, and you see that there's a response that needs to happen, which is me as an artist, me who's trying to understand the environment, the reality in which I'm immersed. How do I position myself to, against, for? Should I actually try to understand what AI is? Should I make art to understand it better? Should I make AI part of my art? Should I try to make like a political statement as an artist using AI against corporate AI? So all these things. So so this was just the political layer. We can cover many layers in this next hour.
But it's very real. I mean, I really like very much the way they have put it. It is that you are the automatic encoding of meaning. And also this part that so to speak, the kitchen of the preparation of the models of AI, which is basically that now is working with data and not knowing how this data was created, etc., etc., etc. This is very, for me, it's very worrisome, right? So for someone that has been leading a laboratory that was called the Data Transparency Lab, which was funded by some companies like AT&T and Telefonica, but on the other side it was Mozilla Foundation and INRIA in France and the Open Data Institute. So there was a mix of interest there, but nevertheless they were trying to convey this idea that, hey, the personal data is important, B, is not that objective, personal data and data in general. It's one of the things that I have to fight in any kind of seminar when I'm working about with machine learning. Is everyone still has this mythical belief that data is subjective. What Eva was saying very clearly, that's where everything happens, right? Where from everything starts. It's all these power relationships they are just coded in just deciding that, let's say, the label old starts at 55 or something like that, right? To put a very simple example. So I think that's very important. It's very important that artists to know that this is super crucial. And I think you're right, Francisco, that this is a kind of a springboard for artists to position themselves in the sense of, okay, if from what do I do from this moment on, no? Right? What can I do? Okay, so yeah, and in that sense, we had an incredible difficult time. It was a completely different setting, a bit technical if you want, but we had an incredible difficult time to actually get to make ourselves understood in the things that both Eva and you were saying about the political aspect of this. And there are difficult. There is, if you want, there is a general problem of technology communication, but I think it's beyond that, right? Because there is a difficult. It is a difficult technology in a way to convey, right? There is this idea that if you practice with it, you learn about that, which is debatable. Because I can say that from my background, right, it's very technical. Everyone knew a lot about that. And they were super innocent about that.
About what? Sorry.
So let's say let's get back the clock 30 years, right? Okay. Here you have your good friend Ramón that was super excited because he had created a wonderful super light Bayesian network that with just 3 clicks knew where you were going to click later and in the next step. 92% of
accuracy.
Of accuracy. So at that time I was a student and I was super. I mean, it was cool. Well, we couldn't see much further. Okay, it took from the people on the computing side. It took quite a lot of time to start to realize that we were doing something very. Let's put it. I wouldn't say dangerous, but just politically charged, right? Okay. So not my professors were not there. They thought it was cool too, right? So there is something inherent there of this kind of let's say fascination with these magic powers that is a real problem with in trying to convey what you were saying. Although there are many artists that are now working from this standpoint, right? Or from this with this goal to make these things evident too, right? But it has taken a lot of time, and we have very big powers that have incredible marketing PR departments that are just conveying a very different message. So I think that there is another dimension that is very interesting to actually, as an artist, to step into, right, and to position yourself. I agree completely with you. But there are very special, I would say, difficulties in our case, right? And one thing that you were saying is just, okay, let's communicate. Yes, but you have to communicate many layers at the same time, right? So one of the things, for example, is just to create this wonderful course of dissemination that started in Finland about elements of AI, if you want, right?
Yeah.
One thing is that, but the other one is actually to have the whole citizenship very aware of what's happening, right? Mm-hmm. And how this automation of meaning is actually happening. And I leave it there. Sorry, I'm supposed to be the moderator. Sorry about that.
Yeah. I think what is also very interesting is, I mean, I'm always publicly saying this, and so, but nobody so far sue me. But I mean, while we work with data, we clearly use everything online. So, for example, I've been discussing this very openly and publicly because at the end, if a machine in 21st century, without writing any username or password, if a machine can go online and write a keyword, and if a machine can access its information, do you really claim an ownership on that? Like if it's something that is public and like a human, right? If I'm a human, if I can write something and if I can read the information, turns into a knowledge and turns into a wisdom, like what really holds machine not to do that? And I think that's the biggest gap, that where the politically or ethically, how the data lies in this, in the internet of everything, right? In a library, yes, it's a physical environment. I'm sorry, but yes, a machine will not soon walk, open a book, read it, and give a claim about an information or idea. But why not a machine doesn't go online and download everything about Barcelona, about New York, about me, about you? So isn't your Facebook account is sort of public? Isn't your like Twitter account talks about your ideas? Aren't we like, I mean, what I'm even my public. So what I'm trying to say is, I think we as humans already decided to use, with or without knowing, saying yes or not, agreeing or disagreeing. Consensus was generate these systems that holds our information in an archaeological context. And I think if we have a machine that can learn, which still doesn't decide yet, but I think it's so fascinating to speculate, as an artist at least, why not machine one day goes online, download everything about something? For example, in the pandemic, I think many of us triggered many ideas, right? Like we are at home sitting on these machines and 2D flat screens, trying to connect each other and make meaning of life. Why not a machine goes online and download everything about nature? So what I was trying to say is, I think we as humans already allow, again, with or without knowing. Maybe in Europe, things are much more democratically discussed and then maybe consensus done and so on. But in the globally thinking, right, very globally thinking, overarching, like deconstructing the borders, which I think what will AI do, right, most likely. And then we decide something and we have something doesn't forget. So while there is ramification of many problems and ethics and so on, but I think we also have something incredibly powerful that is barely discussed, unless you are a deep mind trying to use protein folding, or a professor at Harvard trying to cure cancer and so on, right? But the problem here is, I think Francisco said that, I mean, basically the knowledge of AI beyond just simple tools like Runway ML and so on, it's hard. Like, I don't know any artist randomly can learn in a couple of weeks how to train an AI in a true way, not like a high level gimmicky, gamification. So, but if a painter and a sculptor, spends a century, decades to craft an idea, right? So I don't know, time and space completely deconstructed when we talk about mission intelligence. And I think it's beautiful. That's what I want to say it. So it's really hard to discuss something fluid and liquid. So it's beautiful. I don't know.
You're muted, Ramón.
The thing is, like I am at home, and this is a very populous neighborhood, and so from time to time we have, let's say, interventions from the public on the street, right?
All right.
It is my flat, and I didn't want to interfere, right? So basically, I was saying that this liquidity is really fascinating. I agree with you. This is something different that's out there, and that's one of the things that I think we have to stress. This still is a tool. it's something it's, let's say, pictured as a tool, but it's not the typical tool, right? And it's not just a tool. It's kind of an ecosystem, something that is connected with big networks of agents and actors, but in a very peculiar way. Okay.
Yeah, and I think it's worthwhile to reinforce the message that being just a tool, we humans still have a very important role in how we transform data into information and information into knowledge and knowledge into wisdom. I mean, we are the ultimate gatekeepers of that. And that's why we have like the scientific method. That's why we have science, right? Because I mean, if there's any true artificial intelligence, that's science, right? That's the intelligence that we're building throughout the centuries and perfecting it with methods. And in the century, we have access to big computational power, huge volumes of data, and toolkits of statistical methods to engage with that and make sense of reality and make sense of nature. But none of this is for free. This requires like expert knowledge. This requires a lot of work. This requires a lot of assets like computational resources. Like when we think about, so for instance, we hear these, or we read these headlines on the newspapers saying, "Ooh, GPT-3, it's the old thing. Now we have a Chinese ultra hyper mega new language model called Wudao with 1.7 trillion parameters, and it can do everything, and it will it will just do everything." But that's just not true. I mean, like, I think that it's very important for people to try to understand what's hype and what's not hype. And the journey in understanding what's possible and what they can actually do and conquer by themselves, it takes a lot of effort and it's limited.
Mm-hmm.
And it's almost like a big community effort that has to happen. And learning correctly, learning, like Eva was talking about, like sidestepping like these metaphors, like pure automation, and adopting the correct terminology, the standardized terminology, so that people can talk the same language about the same concepts and try to orchestrate something together, an effort, because it's a huge effort. Like the whole world is engaged in a huge artificial intelligence effort, which is stochastic search of what are the best algorithms for the best data sets for the best problems.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a huge effort that everyone is taking part in.
Okay. So, Eva, are you going? You wanted?
Oh, I was just going to say, yeah, I mean, the problem, especially when you have the luxury of being sort of in academic spaces, is that you get to unravel everything completely. And you just end up back at the beginning, like, what is everything? But I think that sometimes that's really crucial. And I think that asking just those questions, like, it has the scientific community set up the right framework for understanding our human position within the world, and then do we want to teach those machines about the way that we've perceived, or like thinking about how can we rewrite some of the codes that already exist in our society. And I can put a couple different resources in the chat of artists that we are interacting with that are sort of working really hard to renegotiate some of those things that we take for granted. For instance, this very humanist or human-centered approach to the way that we've organized the world, which is something that a lot of these systems are adopting.
I can I can talk.
Of course you can.
So I'll just bid in with some of my, like, maybe talk reflect a bit of my specific work. So uh, for the past 6 years, I've been working on different projects between academia and industry, actually, and with creative people. And I've been designing human-centered or user-centered machine learning tools. And uh, this has been an effort which it specifically tackles the problem of how to make how to democratize artificial intelligence tools, how to democratize machine learning tools, and how. So the first thing that you think is, how can you redesign them so that they're useful, so that they're user friendly, so that people can actually apply them in their creative projects. And it's a significant problem, because there are all sorts of people with all sorts of levels of knowledge and expertise, and they're interested in applying machine learning somehow to specific problems: image, sound, interaction, gesture, sensor data. And there's a lot to say about how to actually design that learning experience so that they can actually you know um, can make something useful, or at least engage in an experience, and try to come up with an understanding of what is it for, what can I apply it to get some intuition, to get some understanding. That involves, for instance, designing you know languages, programming languages, which is what I'm working most recently. How can you design domain specific languages to use with machine learning? But you can also design interfaces for machine learning tools. You can also design, like, what are the examples in the documentation that people have to learn with that. So all of these aspects of machine learning are like really important, uh, really important parts that people need to consider to, for instance, when we're tackling the democratization of AI, or helping people to adopt or learn new skills in machine learning. Yeah, so that was my bit on.
I think on top of this, what was also very inspiring to me, so I was very lucky to start my journey as a self-taught visual programmer. I'm not a computer scientist. I'm not a scientist, but like any artist who wants to like learn how to use computation, creative computation, let's call it, or computational design, there was very opportunities all the time in Europe, especially. And what was for me lucky was inviting from the Google AI team, and I was one of the first generation artists in residence at Google. And that was an incredible program, and 5 years ago, by the way, 2016. And it was the first, by the way, event publicly done for an auction for the Deep Dream algorithm in San Francisco. And I was in that event. I was the only artist on the stage that doesn't know how to use AI. Everyone was genius AI engineers, like people who invent those, neural nets and so on. And it was so welcoming. I didn't feel like I am alien in the game. I wasn't feeling like, oh, he doesn't know anything. In fact, they were very inclusive, and everyone was thoughtful about critics, ethicals, and ramifications. And everyone was just not talking about, shiny sci-fi, everything will be cool. But it was really there was a depth in the dialogue, and it was very good. And then when me and my team learned how to use AI, it was incredible, like this aha moment, because suddenly, beyond just GitHub stuff, right? Now, yes, things are democratized and we can download the code, learn how to run it and so on. But fundamentally understanding who made that algorithm for which reason and what was the problems, it's not written there openly, right? You have to go through a process, like a journey. So what was incredible model, I think, for artists back in time, I'm not sure who is doing right now similar things, was for me was opening mind, like, okay, that's not hard to understand. It is not a alien science. It's not a rocket science. It's something you can reach, learn. So I think as a model of teaching and education, deconstructing the academia sometimes is very important, because sometimes academia is a very slow system invented centuries ago. And unfortunately, like the system we have right now is extremely fast and No offense, I'm also teaching. But
Yeah, yeah, right.
so maybe we need new ways of learning to learn that allows everyone to learn. And maybe teaching learn to learn is more meaningful in long run and centuries, because maybe everyone becomes their own learning engines at their own life. So I get inspired from that process more than ever in any school, in any class in my life, to be honest, in that 1 year.
I also agree, like the Google AMI program was kind of groundbreaking in the sense that it didn't have as far as I personally understand it, didn't have like a mandate of PR for Google itself. So the typical model for artists collaborating with technology companies, or the overwhelming model that's used, is that the artist produces content for the company. Usually it's going through the marketing strategy, essentially. And I think what I see as the most sort of interesting intersections is when there's actually an incentive for the engineers to be working with creative practitioners. So we can't just put them together and expect something to happen, but really to create a framework for that kind of artistic research and argue for the value of creative R&D. I mean, Refik, I know that you work with NVIDIA, and like you're doing some research, they've specifically come to you to develop certain research as a sort of arm of what they're doing. And I really find those kinds of constellations super interesting because they're very rare, and very few companies understand how to utilize that sort of like slower research, or research that's asking less direct questions.
I think that was a great point, because I don't know how many artists have the capacity of doing that or opportunity. But what was really rewarding for me was, at least as a team, so once you reach out to people that you think that they are your hero or that you inspire from their research, I never get no, very openly saying. I mean, I even emailed Frank Gehry when I was a student to say, hey, can I, augment your building, let it dream? Yes, it took a couple of months, but they reply back. So I think there's also this interesting ego problem sometimes in the creatives, that they forgot to reach out. But actually, kill your ego and detach the ego from the idea, and you reach out with the idea. I mean, honestly, what I saw so far is all positivity, like NVIDIA, or for example, LA Philharmonic Orchestra, one of the world's largest organization, but what to do with their 100 years data. And I wasn't sure what to do also with that, because it's so big and big responsibility on the shoulders. But when Google Arts and Culture, which is an incredible, I think, entity, and an LA Phil and an art studio comes together, we made this, institutional triangle that allow us to go deeper than a surface level artist in residence program. So I think artists can also invent, that's what I'm trying to say, is ways of working. And I think when you implement this idea, there wasn't in like a written rule or a protocol, but when you say that, okay, you're an organization for 100 years, incredible, but how will you use your data? Hey, you are Google Arts and Culture. Do you want to help this institution to allow us to use, big data and certain like, computational power? Like I think creating those frameworks are also very important for artists and creators shortly, or even institutions, because nobody like sits and invents these ideas unless someone really speculates that. I think it's also important for creatives to get this responsibility.
Okay, I think that let's say institutionally speaking, you were mentioning that there are some places like organizations or companies that don't understand this kind of cultural shift or this kind of spaces, right? They just put a pressure. I have to say also that it's not just a problem with companies. I mean, there are the institutions, and you were mentioning one. I mean, it's really uphill work to create such a space in a university, for example. It is. Right? It is difficult just to collaborate between disciplines within the academic. When you bring in people from outside, you're right. You have to create an incredible set of incentives so that everyone just can step into this new place. Some, let's say, more eagerly, some other ones more cautiously, some other ones just out of curiosity. And then let's allow the sufficient time for people to really start to collide in a way, right? And to start to coalesce and get new ideas and be recognized for that. So that's something, and you're right, it's not just a protocol. I mean, I was involved, I remember it's something subtler sometimes, right? I remember working with, in a workshop that lasted 5 years, right? Typical, right? With Simon Penny trying to create this kind of protocol for interdisciplinary work here in Barcelona. Basically, I would say that the best outcome of that, for the reflection that everyone involved was forced to, let's say, do, right? So that, and everyone in the end come up with its own version of its own, or her own version of the protocol, right? And it sparked some interesting initiatives later, like, I don't know, putting the biologist in the research part here, and the biomedical research part here, working with a punk feminist group to create new views of on what is gynecology and how they were actually doing the research with an incredible amount of bias and not taking into account the point of view of women, for example, right? This is one thing. But to actually reach that point, you needed someone within both institutions and out of the institution that really is willing to risk to create this space. And we have, it's not impossible, of course it's not. And it's a matter of being stubborn enough, so to speak, right? And persistent and resist. But in general, all the incentives are not that much aligned to favor this kind of spaces. Once it happens, it's wonderful, really. It can create opportunities for actually new research. For example, I always been trying to, let's say, do research the other way around, right? Here, in the academia, they think that you come up with wonderful concepts. These wonderful concepts became papers, and then became patents, and then became technology, and became some kind of product, right? That may fulfill a need. And something ideas, let's say, start from outside and then work inside. That's how what the type of spaces that I've been trying to open up, right? For example, that's what exactly the type of space we are fighting to have. In this collaboration that we are opening up with several other actors around music and artificial intelligence. Hello, Francisco, right? So basically about actually just letting other people from outside academia to step in and let's see what happens, right? Or say, and put not a lot of rigidity in any kind of expected outcomes or any kind of interaction protocol. Of course, there is an incredible problem of, let's say, language to start with, but okay, that's the first thing we are trying. Okay, for example, I think after a lot of years, I think my experience is these are the most important spaces that you may find to actually create interesting knowledge, something that really changes things.
Totally agree with you.
Okay, so sorry. I didn't want to be that emphatic, but this is my experience, yes. Okay, so, yep. Well, there is one thing that Eva just dropped there in our chat, right? The chat that we here, which is something that I've been always looking with very much interest and actually, I would say affection, right? Which is this initiatives that are looking at AI from other perspective, not the perspective of the society where AI started, right? I always, when I explain artificial intelligence, I just put photographs of the people that were the Dartmouth meeting of 1956. They were all men, okay? All engineers, all mathematicians. They were, let's say, on this very East Coast institution, right? So it's very interesting that Eva just shared with us this, the indigenous protocol of AI and the working group, because when you read some of their documents, it makes you look at things in a completely different way.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. One of the authors, Suzanne Kite, is a fantastic artist and researcher. Mm-hmm. And we recently commissioned a piece for the Creative AI Labs database. And in the piece, she annotates one of her scripts and tries to kind of give readers insight into the different methodologies and different resources that kind of have guided her practice, which has led to this research into an AI which is formed from an indigenous epistemology, essentially. And that's something, that they claim doesn't exist yet. And so at first, when we asked them to make a contribution to the Creative AI Lab, we realized that actually this was like a ridiculous request because they're not building on an existing technological history where they can point to certain, whatever academic lineage of research or knowledge building, but instead they're drawing from completely disparate knowledge resources and applying them to technology. So for us to put those pieces randomly into the AI Labs database would make no sense. So it turned into a kind of longer project where this piece that she wrote and annotated is the kind of bridge of how we bring in that knowledge into our research around AI, and how we start to understand things, like the relationship. For instance, she talks about the relationship to certain ceremonial rituals and how we can understand those in relationship to technology, or we can understand our relationship to technology as also a relationship to raw materials, as the Lakota people understand their relationship to inanimate objects like rocks.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, definitely worth a read.
Yeah, definitely it is. Okay. So, okay, we are kind of approaching the final time for that. So let's break some topics like or cliches like Spanish not being punctual, which I started being not punctual this meeting. Sorry, but basically, well, I maybe we can open if there's any question from the audience, just if they want just to drop their question at the chat, and if not, then there is let's say this kind of hope of let's say this kind of how to say it, expectation about the liquidity of things, right? So, and this expectation that it has been identified here with technology. It's not just with technology. It's this other possibility of opening up these liquid bubbles where the unexpected could happen again, right? And I think that it's not just a difficulty or an interest or a goal that we may have just in AI and art, but it's not something more general because we have very, very strong challenges ahead. Okay, so if you want to make any other further comment or to something I say in Ramón here, pues okay. So basically, if you want to add something else, and if not, I hope to meet some of you tomorrow here in Barcelona. And in any other occasion, I will be more than happy to keep chatting with you. And thank you very much for your contribution. It has been a pleasure, really, to actually share this time with you. Okay.
Great to see you, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Lovely discussion.
Nice to see you all.
Thank you to you all. Okay.
Thank
you. Bye. And thank you for Espronceda for bearing with us. Okay. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.